All right. Thank you very much. So, hi everybody. My name is Joel Cardella. I have been in IT for over 20 years in various capacities. I have my contact information for you here because I'm a talker and I like to talk. And so the big thing that I'm going to push at you today is if you want to talk about something, send me an email, call me up. I'm more than willing to chat about anything. Sometimes when we get together, we just run ideas by each other. If you talk out loud, if you have a sounding board, helps you work through your own problems. So I'm all about the community and doing that. Now normally, this is very hard for me to stand in one spot. I normally rove, but because we're doing the audio and stuff, I got to stand here. So it's going to be a little difficult for me to do that. So if I start to stray, just push me back. So I'm going to talk to you today about data breaches really being the cost of doing business as seen by a lot of companies. So this is my snarky way. Having an English degree, I have to work in words like fait accompli whenever I talk about something. But essentially, what I'm saying here is we can't arrive at a conclusion that says companies are worried about data breaches and data breaches costing them money. That is a true statement. Data breaches happen and data breaches cost money. Whether or not a company is concerned about that is all based on their risk appetite. That's really the focus of what we're talking about here. So if we look at things like data breaches, right, this is not new information. The cost of data breaches is rising. It always rises. A lot of this is probably because there's a lot of companies that pop up that deal with data breaches, and they get news media coverage and they get the ability to get their stuff out there, so the recovery from that data breach goes up as a result of these things happening. So it's kind of like one thing driving the other, the tail wagging the dog, if you will, right? Average cost for each lost or stolen record, according to Ponymon, has gone up to $154 per record in 2015, right? So if you were doing a calculation and you were going to sit down with your finance person or whatever, you're going to say, hey, for every record it costs us $154 to recover from our data breach. And if we have 10,000 records we're doing, then that's, what, $1.5 million, right? And that's a good thing to do. That's a good thing to say. It's a good starting point to have those discussions. However, the other side of the coin is $1.5 million may be a drop in the bucket for the people you're talking about. They may be willing to take a risk on $1.5 million and say, yeah, it's fine. We can handle that. We don't need to deal with it. Don't worry about it. And this drives security people crazy, right? Okay, so the question is, what about things like loss of reputation? Especially in this report, I know this number is supposedly reflective of that. I don't know how that's exactly calculated, right? But there is. It's an excellent question, and I'm actually going to address it in a little bit. So here's the attribution for you that I give you from the sources that I take. So you can look this stuff up, and you can see what these numbers are, and you can see, what drives the data in these reports, right? So I have to put out a big shout out to Dave Shackelford for posting something that helped me significantly right before I did this talk, and that was the information that kind of drives the things I'm talking about. So there's a website called Information is Beautiful, which is a giant data repository of data visualization. Information is Beautiful is great. One of the things I do is I teach data visualization at a university, and this is a website we use all the time. So if you've never been here, I encourage you to check it out. It's a very, very good resource for you. So what they have up there is they have a thing about the world's biggest data breaches. This graphic is so large, it took 4 slides to put together. So I only took out the top part of it because they actually do a timeline where they go back to 2015 to the latest. These are obviously data breaches that have been reported in some way, shape, or form. So what is kind of omitted on here is the data breaches that go unreported, right? What are those? Well, we don't know, but we can infer from what we see here. So the size of the bubble in this particular case indicates the amount of records that were breached or hacked or stolen or whatever you want to say. So you got some big names here. Anthem, Healthcare, right? You got eBay. We have JP Morgan Chase, a bank. We have Target. Everybody's familiar with the Target breach, right? Plus a bunch of these other stuff. And if we went down this slide, you'd see some pretty recognizable names as we drive down that. One of the filters you can do up here with this particular infographic is you can look at the record sensitivity. So the bubble size changes, and the bigger the bubble, the more sensitive records were released. When we say sensitive records, we mean things like PII, personally identifiable information, name, address, social security number, healthcare records, things like that, right? So you can kind of pivot this data and look different ways at what's what as you go through the visualization. It's very interesting. It's a good tool to use that you can use when you're having discussions about data and data breaches and data leaks, things like that. Now, what's interesting is if we go back here and we look at companies that are on here, okay, again, remember this is a big giant graphic. One of the things that Dave did is he pulled some stock data of these companies, and he said, okay, we know they've had these breaches, whether they're big data breaches or whether they're sensitive breaches. Let's look at how they did in the stock market when it happened. So this, for example, this particular one is Heartland Payment Systems, which had a data breach. So right here where the circle is, roughly in 2009, I think, was when they had their breach announcement. You can see they had a very poor stock performance. Okay? It was somewhere between $0 and $10, about $5, we'll say. And now, as of January 1st of this year, they're up at $48.79. Okay? So over time, since the breach announcement, they've had a steady increase over the last 5 years. Okay, that's one company. Let's look at another company. Let's look at TJX. You might know them as TJ Maxx, right? They had a breach, fairly significant one. It was one of the bigger ones that was announced when it happened, 2007. They have also performed significantly well, stopping at 68.50 when these snaps were taken, right? Let's look at Adobe, right? We know Adobe had a big breach. We know Adobe has problems with their products. Apparently, those problems are not enough to actually cause them any fiscal issues because they too have gone up in value, right? Global Payments, they had a big breach. Theirs was a sensitive breach because they had credit card details and name and address details, so there was PII in this particular breach. They've had no problems either. And then we talked about Target. Target's fairly recent in our timeline here. Here's the breach announcement. Here's their stock price. Doubled, at least. Interesting. So I grabbed a tweet from Space Rogue back in February. Target paid $1.2 billion in dividends on $21.8 billion in revenue. Its data breach cost it $162 million. They had a CEO that was fired. They took a reputational hit. To them, this is a cost of doing business figure. That's simply the way executives are thinking about this, especially when these things happen. Do you have a question? Okay, so the question is, are publicly traded companies' boards liable for breaches that happen? So the answer is not yet. The SEC has been making some guideline recommendations, and generally when the SEC makes guideline recommendations, they eventually become some sort of, I don't want to call it law because it may not necessarily be a law, but there could be a regulatory rule that says they're there. The language that they have used is not explicit enough to say we're going to hold your feet to the fire and you're going to be liable and responsible, right? Unlike SOX, which says, Mr. CFO or Mr. CEO, when you're signing off on this document and you're saying that your books are good, you will go to jail if they are bad. Whole different thing. So the SEC has been making some motions to do that. And it's a good question, but I will tell you, I work for a company that's $50 billion. We're private. We don't give a crap about the SEC. So, well, yeah, that remains, yeah, I mean, yes, I'm sure that's true. But again, let's look at a company like Sony, right? Very interesting you said that. So I'm going to read this off the slide. This is Michael Linton. He's the CEO of Sony Entertainment Systems. Sony has had a couple of significant incidents. The most recent, you might be aware, where they got a hold of a ton of emails from Sony, and those emails got leaked, and it's led to all kinds of very interesting things into the lens of a large corporation. But it says here, this is from an article in Fortune magazine. In December 2014, in an interview with National Public Radio, Linton insisted his company was extremely well prepared for conventional cybersecurity, but faced the worst attack in U.S. history. He has repeatedly described it as a highly sophisticated attack. Sony Pictures provided written responses to questions through Robert Lawson, its chief spokesman. He says Linton has no plans to fire or discipline anyone. CEO's reasoning rests on the belief that because Sony's assailant was a foreign government with far more resources than a renegade band of hackers, what happened was unstoppable. The studio simply faced an unfair fight. Now, all these emphases are mine. They're there because this is what is in the mind of the executives. When they hire Mandiant and they hire another third party to go through, and the third party tells them, oh, you faced this foreign enemy, and they had all these resources, and you had nothing. That's just cushion for them to rest on to go, oh, then there's nothing we could have done. Okay? Research this company. Research the CISO. His name is Jason Spaltro. Go back to 1998 when he said things like, I'm not going to spend $10 million to cover a $1 million data asset. That's sound reasoning. He's right. You don't spend $10 million to cover $1 million in data assets. It doesn't make sense, right? I think he said it for the wrong reasons. But that does not make sense. Fiscally, you have to look at this the way your executives are looking at this, because they're seeing this as a cost of doing business. So if it's a cost of doing business, then you need to think about it in those terms. You need to pivot your thinking and say, okay, how can I pose this in business terms to get them to think about this the way I need them to think about it, right? And it takes some work. It really does. A few words about data. And this is a really important point. And this is one of the reasons that data breaches get me excited. If the data represents you, you are the owner. If it's your name and your address and your social security number, you own that data, sight unseen. When you provide it to companies because they require it, like your healthcare company or your employer, they become custodians. If they're collecting it or they're buying it or they're doing something with it, they are custodians of the data. Okay? You are the owner, they're the custodians. So they're responsible for it. And they have a fiduciary responsibility to that data. The problem is they also have a responsibility to their shareholders and to their stakeholders and to their boards. And in that equation, you, the data owner, will be on the downside of whatever risk equations are there. So when we talk about things like PII, even though PII is protected, right, HIPAA laws specifically will protect healthcare information, that's still the downside of risk, because the healthcare laws say, well, we're going to impose a penalty. Okay, but if the penalty I pay is less than what it would take for me to secure that data, that's a risk I can live with, and the data owners suffer, right? Again, this is what's going on in the minds of a business executive. They're looking at this from a business standpoint as a business equation. Right? Is your question? I would agree. I would agree with you, other than the fact that the Anthem breach has yet to have a monetary penalty that has caused Anthem any significant pain. Because yes, you're right. When you're talking about healthcare, that's sort of the bread and butter of the healthcare organization, right? Even patient care. When we talk about patient care, it's all data. It's all data. Yes, you know, they want to make you well and do things with your body, but it all relies around that data collection and the back end of that data stuff. And they do need to take those steps to provide it. And it can very significantly impact them. And I've seen health plans go under, you know, as a result of it, or get acquired, or what happens. Yes, I totally agree. But that's just a small cosm in the whole thing. Again, I work for a $50 billion company. I have 12,000 users all over North America, the US and Canada. Canada doesn't have HIPAA laws. Canada has their own healthcare privacy laws. Actually, they're more stringent than ours. And the penalties are stiffer. But again, when we do the equation, when we really cost it out, the company may be willing to bear the risk to say, yeah, this data could get out there. You know, what can you do cheap? Okay, I can encrypt it. I can give you dual factor. I can give you this. Okay, that's fine. We're good to go, right? It all depends on kind of what your compliance gods are in charge of. But yeah, I agree with you. It really depends on context, right? okay, you say that, but that is not what's happening, right? For right now, I agree. I'm definitely talking about current context. I agree. Maybe the future will change. Maybe the SEC rules will change that. I agree. But right now, if you want to have discussions right now, it's got to be in the context of the cost of doing business. So let me show you a couple of things. First of all, let me tell you what not to do. I base what not to do on all the things that didn't work for me. Okay? So this is it. This chapter is called Don't Do What I Did, right? So first of all, don't ever refer to security as an insurance model. Boy, did this one fail hard, right? I walked this line and I hit it hard and I said, yep, security, it's insurance, until the CFO said to me, so how do I know when I'm overinsured? How do I know when I'm insuring a Porsche when I'm driving a Chevy? And I went, yeah, that's a real good question. I don't know the answer to that. So I got to go back. Okay, so it's not insurance. Forget it's insurance. And I don't mean cybersecurity insurance, right, which is a totally different thing, which you can actually buy to hedge against your data assets. I'm talking about security in general, your security spending, your security budget as an insurance model, right? It does not work out that way. Second thing, don't use standards or standards that don't map to your industry. Or do the apples to oranges thing. So my industry is manufacturing. I tried using some standard information that was out there, like healthcare, for data protection. It didn't work because the correlations just weren't there. We didn't have the same type of data. We didn't have the same amount of data. We didn't have the same data transit as some of the other industries did. So if you're going to do this, if you're going to sort of say, let's look at what everybody else is doing, make sure everybody else is in the context of what you're doing and get away from that apples to oranges. This was hard because especially in my sector, in manufacturing is a very, very broad brush. But when you start to look at manufacturing, there are many, many different types of manufacturing. So it was really hard for me to find correlated data to say, oh, here's industrial versus chemical versus whatever is out there and sort of say that these are all the same things. Because, chemical manufacturing, highly dependent on intellectual property, right? I'm in materials. We dig out rocks from the earth. Not a whole lot of proprietary there. So, and then don't confuse compliance with security. This is something that we hear all the time. This is something that Mark was saying in his keynote. And he was saying, stop saying don't confuse compliance with security. Tell me what to do about it. And I will. So that's why I want to point that out, right? Specifically, don't discuss them in the same context, because very often in the minds of the executives, what they're reading is they're reading reports from auditors. And audit reports are compliance reports. So when you start talking to them about these things, they're going to think about them in the same context. Your job is to try to give them different context and separate those things in their mind and say, we have a thing called security and we have a thing called compliance. Additionally, we have a thing called governance and we have a thing called risk. And I'll go through all four of those and kind of define those for you, at least as I see them. Help them to understand and uncouple these terms. That will make your conversations much, much easier. And I say executives because I talk to executives. Maybe you're just talking to a manager. Maybe you're talking to a peer or to a business person. It's the same thing. If you're not in the sphere, people do not understand security and compliance are not the same thing. They don't understand it. So it's our job to educate, right? So I didn't want to go into all the things. Let me go into what to do, right? But those are a few things that did not work out for me. Your mileage may vary. Maybe they work for you. So one of the things we can do and do is pivot, right? This can be and sometimes should be very obvious. When you are pivoting the discussion, tell your customer, okay, let me change the context of the discussion, right? Don't do it real subtly so they come to the conclusion themselves. Set the table for them. All right, backtrack, step back. Let's say we have this thing called security and we have this thing called compliance. These are the things we do in security and these are the things we do in compliance. And they work together, but they're completely separate things. Tell them what you're doing. But pivot those discussions. Be able to talk about your data, your job, your whatever in a different way than the way you're talking about it now. That's what pivoting is, right? I'm just turning from here to here, having the same discussion. I'm just coming at it from a different angle, right? Understand what your ROI is. ROI? Anybody not know what ROI means? Return on investment, right? The number of dollars I put in and the number of dollars I put out. That's not the right word. Whatever it is, right? Input and output. And the number of dollars in should be less than the number of dollars out. It's a very simple equation. It's right here. If X is less than Y, I have a positive ROI. If X is greater than Y, I have a negative ROI. And if X is equal to Y, then the ROI needs to be evaluated to fit into one of these buckets. Now, a word about negative ROI. Negative ROI actually can help you. It helps you not with a business case to introduce a new technology because you'll get shot down. It helps you when you have a legacy technology that's costing you more money to run over time than something new would. So don't dismiss negative ROI. Negative ROI can help you, okay? But it's only going to help you on the legacy side of the equation versus whatever, the new process or the new thing to introduce. If you're trying to introduce something new, you've got to be in positive territory. You have to show. This is the whole, I'm not going to spend $10 million to secure $1 million in assets, right? Now, if I'm doing that, I need to evaluate that and say, why is it negative? What happened? What changed? Something caused that to change. Either the technology aged, something got better, we're keeping our data too long, whatever, right? So it can help you. Other ROI can be more complex and they need their own criteria and their own models. So when we look at just the simple one here for compliance, we say, okay, compliance is going to cost us this much. A data breach is going to cost us this much. So we can spend this much to secure this much or do a cost avoidance on this, right? Those are easy equations to do. And I recommend that you start with the easy, but you have to finesse the complex ones when you really start to get into things where it's like, well, we have DLP or we have IDS, and it helps us because it does these other things for us. And cost avoidance is a good way to do that. Did you have another question? Correct. Yeah. That is very true. Tangible benefits. This fits a tangible model. So the intangibles do have to be accounted for somehow. But if you can work them into a cost model, that's going to benefit you, right? Because CFOs, they live and breathe this stuff all day, right? And if you're going to talk to a CFO, you want to be able to do that. What are the intangibles? What would it cost for a reputation problem? Look around. Look in your industry. Look laterally. Ask questions. Ask other people. What do you think it would cost? We want to treat cybersecurity as a business risk. The key word here is business. If your people in your organization, whether it's your business, your management, your peers, your board, your executives, are not looking at cybersecurity as a business risk, you're not going to get very far. So you have to do this. You have to look at it as a business risk. So the first thing that has to happen is you have to change. You have to start thinking about it as a business risk yourself. And start talking about it as a business risk. Start referring to it as a business risk. Okay? I built my organization on 4 pillars: security, governance, risk, and compliance. Each one of those pillars has a different definition, and I'm actually going to show you what those are. Okay? And they each have a business driver, and they each have a business value. Business risk is the key to get people to pay attention to what you need to talk about. Okay? And cybersecurity is a business risk. So I'm not telling you to lie. I'm not telling you to do anything you shouldn't already be doing. I'm telling you to try to change the minds of the people who are dealing with you to think about this as a business risk, like it should. One of the things you can do, if you're responsible for risk assessments, and maybe you've got a security risk assessment template, go to your business and find out if they have a business risk assessment template. How do you guys assess risk in the business? Change your template to look very, very similar to theirs. So when you start presenting this, people will start seeing it in a format they're used to consuming, and you'll start to change their minds about what this stuff is. You'll start to change their approach to, oh, this is a business risk, right? Even if it's color coding, simple things like that, you would be surprised. They have a lot of value, and they have a lot of impact, right? Engage your peers and supervisors on risk topics. Talk to them about it. When the media breaks a big story, oh, this happened, immediately engage your users or engage your folks. And go, hey, yeah, this happened. We're okay because of this and this and this and this. Because this is what they see. They don't see anything outside of our world other than what's being published at them or blasted at them by CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and all this crap, which is all FUD, right? It truly is. It truly takes the worst. The Chris Roberts airplane experience, it should be a great example of that, right? That was all FUD. I sat and watched Chris's presentation, had actually talked to him before that about all of this, and I had a lot of the details that came out in the media that were completely wrong. And I was like, this is crazy. It was just absolutely insane. But this is where our ROI begins. So when we talk about ROI, okay, cybersecurity as a business risk, now we've started the return on investment cycle when we start thinking about it as a business risk. So that's an important piece. Next thing we do is we want to build a path to awareness by your leadership. We want them to be aware. We want them to understand what it is we are talking about in the right context, in a format they can consume and understand. If you ever does anybody talk to executives directly? Okay. Executives don't deal well with slides with a lot of words. Okay? It's pictures, very small sentences, very short presentations. That's the world of the executive. That's how they live, right? Talk to me like I'm two kind of thing. That's fine. Can you take everything you do in security and condense it to 2 slides? That's my challenge to you. If you can, you're likely very good at sending the message you need to send. If you look at it and you go, wow, it's missing all this stuff, there's too much information there at that level. And you got to start scaling it back, right? But start to do this. Build this path to awareness. Start with the next level manager or managers in other departments. Hit them up and talk to them about security stuff. And go, what do you think? Do you think we do it well? What's been your experience? Have you ever had your identity stolen? That's a question I ask my users. Have you ever had your identity stolen? I'll have a few people go, yeah, that happened to me. Well, what did you do? Well, this and this and this. Well, did you know that if you tell me, I can report it to the FBI for you? Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, absolutely, I can do that. FBI will take the case, they'll put it in. Nothing may ever happen, but, we can build these patterns that help everybody overall. And so it gets in people's heads that you can help them with something. And by the way, did you know that you can report it to the FBI on behalf of your users? If you're not a member of InfraGard, I highly, highly recommend you check out InfraGard, INFRAGARD, InfraGard. InfraGard is a coalition of the private sector, well, and public sector too, I think, right? Well, yeah, private, public, and the FBI. And we get together, and there's conferences, there's information. The FBI, they've generated the malware tool. There's a malware tool they recently released to help you do malware analysis. It's a very, very good organization. It costs nothing to join. It costs nothing to stay. It's just great information. Okay? So check it out. You have a local representative. They have chapters all over the United States. Yep. Yeah, there's a Detroit chapter. Yep, absolutely. That's the one that I belong to. But if you're not a member of InfraGard, do it. You don't get blasted with information all the time. So what's interesting is when it does come, I take the time to read it. Because maybe I get information once every 6 weeks. Oh, what's up now? This is interesting. What have you? Did you have another question? What I like to do with risk is I like to talk to them in terms that they're used to hearing it. So I don't want you to introduce to them new risk models, right? I want to say, how do we do risk in the business? And let me show that to you in those terms, right? If I can try to have it consume it for them. Because really what you're talking about is gauging the risk appetite, right? How do we gauge that risk appetite? I'll tell you what I did here in a couple of slides, and that might help you. So we can also learn from the past mistakes of others. And this is where ROI is proven. This is where you can say, hey, this thing happened. We do this thing that would cause it not to happen to us or would happen in a lesser way. Therefore, we can kind of make a positive correlation there to say what we're doing is helping. Here's an example of Sony. When the Sony breach happened, one of the problems with Sony was they had an email retention policy that left up to 7 years of old messages on their servers that were unencrypted. So the hackers got in, they grabbed these, they dumped them to the world, and we now know what Sony looks like for 7 years. And we've seen racism, we've seen sexism, we've seen classism, we've seen all kinds of terrible things that company cultures try to bury because their stupid email retention policy didn't kick in. If you ask any lawyer about this, they will say the worst thing that can ever happen is that you keep emails around. Lawyers want you to delete emails immediately. You read them and delete them. That's it. Always have an empty inbox. Maybe that's your excuse to have an empty inbox. The lawyers told me I had to delete everything, right? That'd be a great thing, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be awesome? Right? Another problem was the company was essentially using email for long-term storage of their business records. Now, this is the business's problem. The business did not deal well with a document retention system. So they said, no, we'll just use email. I've seen this happen. I've been in organizations where this exact thing happened. And when they tried to change it, there were screams of protest from the business, and they backed off and said, okay, we won't do this. They tried to implement a 2-year retention policy on email. Well, I've got business contracts that are going back 10, 15 years that I need to keep for valid business reasons. I might get sued for something that happened 10 years ago, and if I can't produce the documentation of that, I have no legal footing. That's a valid business reason to keep documentation. An email system that is unencrypted is the wrong place to keep that documentation. So that's the conversation. You go, okay, look, see how this happened to Sony and see how we do this here? We need to look at better document storage. Where can we keep documents that are safe, that the business can have access to them whenever they need them, that we can use them for legal defense if we need it? Those are all good things to do. An email system is not the way to do that, right? Does that make sense? An array of sensitive information, including usernames and passwords for IT administrators, were kept on unprotected spreadsheets and Word files with names like computer passwords. Anybody ever had a pen test done by an external third party and found yeah, absolutely. I found them on my own network. I actually monitor my own network for certain keywords, and I see them come up. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this happens. This happens. I had a pen tester come in. And in an hour had compromised one of my system administrator's passwords because it was weak. Windows sysadmin had access to the entire network. Now, the scope of the penetration test was try to get in, try to do this stuff. In an hour, he'd owned the network. He's like, what do you want me to do now? I said, tell me how much damage you could do. He goes, okay. It was catastrophic. It's absolutely catastrophic. Right? So learn from the mistakes of others. Use that story if you want. That's a good story. Right? I went to that system administrator and I said, really? Do we have to go through this? We now have specific security awareness classes for sysadmins that they're required to go through every year. Just to remind them, stop using weak passwords. So in this particular talk, I don't want to talk about vendors or things like that, but I understand what you're saying. There are document retention systems that reside in cloud spaces. I believe we've now gotten to the point where some of them are trustworthy. And so I think I personally, as a security manager, when my company comes to me and say, what do you think about this? I say, let's look at it because it's cheap, it's easy, it's accessible from everywhere. Let's look at their security controls. So we actually have a process that allows us to evaluate cloud vendors from a security standpoint. And so, what does it look like and how do we get through it? And if they pass our tests, then we say, yeah, green light, let's go for it, let's do it. So I would advocate this. I think that's what cloud was built for, right? It really was. There's a whole lot of other things that go into that. You got to talk to lawyers, you got to talk to this because you have to make sure that you're retaining things correctly. Like, for instance, I'm in industrial manufacturing. One of the things I have to deal with is environmental law. And environmental law has much longer statutes on it than a lot of other law out there. So we sometimes have to keep environmental records for 15 or 20 years. But that is an exception to our standard policy of 2-year document retention, right? So all those things have to go into play and you have to figure it all out. But yeah, I would encourage you, look at them. Definitely do an evaluation. Ask questions, certainly. How do you guys secure this? What do you do? What happens if you get breached? Well, we never have. Well, what happens when you do, right? Those are good questions to ask. Do it. Put them on the spot. Be prepared. Know your data and know what it takes to protect it, right? But let someone else make the risk decision on it. This is really key. This is really key for InfoSec people who are emotionally attached to the things that they have been paid to shepherd, right? Again, remember what I said about being a data owner and data custodian. You are not data owners. You own no data in your organization. I would suggest you don't even own the data that you yourself generate. I would suggest that somebody else owns that data. I would suggest that because you need to think of it that way in order to detach yourself emotionally. It's not your data. You don't care. If they want to take that data and throw it out on a web server unencrypted for the entire world to see, That's their decision. That is a business decision to make. Okay, I am your counselor. I am your advisor. I advise you not to do that. I advise you that I'm looking for a new job if you do that, right? That's your capacity. That's what you want to do. Detach yourself emotionally. This was really hard for my team. Okay, we run an ERP, and in our ERP, there's a lot of data, and my team is responsible for all of the segregation of duties mitigations in there. Those segregations of duties, however, are not driven by us. We don't care what they are. They're driven by financial controls. I mentioned we're a private organization. We have very SOX-like controls on our data that come from Europe. Okay, Europe, very, very stringent on data protection. So all of the segregation of duties that we implement come from these European standards. But we don't care what they are. We simply implement them. If the business wants to break those SODs, that's on them and their auditors. That's not on us. Right? So detach yourself. So be prepared. Know what your data is. Network, network, network. Talk to people. Come to these kinds of events. MySec. Mark was pushing MySec really hard this morning, and I totally agree. Right? Be involved in your community. Do what you can. Engage on Twitter, forums, Swipe. Everybody know what Swipe is? Know what Swipe is? Swipe is steal with integrity and pride. Anything you see at any of this stuff, you take it and you use it. That includes all my stuff. My contact information is in here. If you want these slides, this presentation, I will email it to you. I do not care. Send me a note, no problem. I'll get it to you. Okay? But definitely, do this. If it's out there, use it. It's information you can use. It's awesome stuff. Right? And this is where ROI can be enhanced, because you can start to say, hey, other people are doing this. This looks like it's a thing. And you can have discussions around it. It's a really useful thing. What's that? Oh, yeah, no problem. Okay, so this is a really long slide, and this is why I would email you to this, because I'm not going to talk about this whole thing. But this is when I was talking about, I took 4 pillars, security, governance, risk, and compliance. I split them down, and I said, here's the functional areas. Here are the key functions of those areas. Security does this, governance does this, risk does this, compliance does this. How do we achieve those things? These are the things that we do, right? What is the business value of those things? These are the business values that those things represent. This is a huge slide. Again, when we talk to executives, this is a little bit hard for them to consume, but I can talk to it and I can say, and if you want the details, I'll give you the details. But they understand now that we've got direction that takes us right into business value. Security equals business value. Security is a business risk. Absolutely. Good conversations to have. All right? The next slide here, what are our critical success factors? What makes us successful? Our critical success factors is when we are providing cost-effective security controls and risk mitigation. Okay, great. It's kind of a nebulous thing, paints it with a broad brush, but it's something we can zero in on if we need to. What are our key activities? These are the things that we do. What are our key interfaces? IT security, project management, external auditors, legal, corporate communications, blah, 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 blah. Right? This is where security interfaces to the world. What are our guiding principles? One of the first things I did when I built the organization is I set 5 guiding principles. And I refer to these all the time in every presentation. These are our guiding principles. Right? Steal them. Take them. They're yours. I don't care. They're generic. I think I stole them from somebody else. It's very possible. I steal a lot of stuff. Right? It's very possible. If it's out there on the public web, it's mine. I'm using it. Right? I'll wait till you're done, and I'll flip. All right. So another thing that I always present, every single one of my presentations ends with this graphic. My executives are now used to this. This is the layered security model. This is where it shows all the security controls that we have down to the critical business data, just a brief explanation of what those are. It's a super, super, super simple architectural diagram. That's all it is, right? But it's something they can look at. This is actually like a widget in PowerPoint. Like, I didn't even build this. All I had to do was type some words and it built it for me. It was beautiful, right? You can do this. Super easy stuff. Take this one, steal it. I don't care. Just modify it with what you want in there. That's okay. But I put this in every single presentation at the very end, and they're used to it now. Oh yeah, that's how we do security. That's how we do security. Yep. It's layered. Layered defense. All about layered security. It's helpful. For us, segregation of duties. So whenever we have a segregation of duties conflict, it resides at the access control layer, right? Versus being somewhere up here. Right, because these are really business processes that are running. SODs are business processes, so the only way we can control those business processes is at the access layer, application layer, if you will. Right? So final thoughts. Remember, your job is to lower the risks of doing business and provide positive ROI, or evaluate negative ROI and come back with a better business case. You start doing that, people will start noticing. Emotionally detach yourself from the things that drive you nuts as an InfoSec admin or a manager. Just, it's not my data, it's not my thing. I think they're making a bad decision. That's okay, it's their decision to make. If you're a parent with children, you completely understand where I'm coming from, right? Completely understand it. I think it's a bad decision. Feel free to make it. Come back to me when you need help. It's okay. Understand you're there as an advisor, as a counselor. When you make decisions in this capacity, you become trusted. You're no longer a gatekeeper. We want to get away from gatekeeper. Gatekeeper equals compliance. We don't want to be gatekeepers anymore. It might be part of what we do. We don't want to be identified as gatekeepers, right? Keep in mind, though, in all of this, your business can do business without security. They can. They can function without you perfectly fine. It's very, very high risk, but they can do it. Okay? So you need to have a little bit of humility, is what this means. Because once the benefits outweigh the risks, you're not really needed anymore. Okay. Always pays to have some humility. Definitely have that. And then that's my contact information. I think that's all I had for you. So, again, feel free to email me, tweet me, whatever you need to do to get a hold of me. I'll give you this. I'm willing to talk. I'll give you I normally have business cards. I'm sorry, they're all getting reprinted right now because we're going through a merger. But if I had business cards, I'll give you those out, but I'll give you my phone number. You can call me. I mean, I'm totally willing to talk about stuff. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, right? In fact, I don't consider myself smart in any capacity at all. I am, however, a very good listener. And so sometimes when you just talk to things about people, you work through problems and you're like, oh, yeah. One of the things I do, I'm a Gartner client, and I organize a monthly Gartner call with other Gartner clients where we just get on the phone and we all talk to each other. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. We don't have an agenda. We're just like, what's on people's minds today? What do you need to do? You know, how can we think about this in a different way? And we try to leverage the groupthink to help each other out. Because when we help each other out, everybody benefits from this. Even though I'm talking to a university that has a completely different business model and a bank that has a completely different business model, we have the same problems, right? Our business doesn't listen to us. Our executives don't care. How do we deal with that? What do? We get together and we talk about it. Those are good things. We have 5 minutes, roughly. Okay, so do we have any more questions in the last 5 minutes? Go ahead. Yeah, so the question is, with regulations changing, will breaches become a financial strategy? I absolutely believe that's true. Again, when I say data breaches are the cost of doing business, that's what I'm talking about. There are businesses that will decide we'll take the risk, which means strategically it is. Maybe they need a reason to spend $162 million and then write that off. Right? That absolutely is a possibility. And I think it probably happens already. It's just not, widely talked about. But sure. Anyone else? Okay, I hope that helped you out. Please feel free to give me a call. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.